Welcome everyone who's joined in today. Today is actually this year's first webinar for our Master of Management Marketing Analytics program. And to start off introductions, I'm Rishika. I'm an associate professor of marketing at the Poole College of Management. I'm also the director of our Master of Management Marketing Analytics program. And you probably can't see our associate director, but that's Allison Anthony, and she's working behind the scenes today. And a lot of you already know her, and if you don't know her, you will know her when you come and learn about our program. So the plan for today is it's a very special event. We are joined with our guest speakers, Stefanie Gordish and Mitchell-Guthrie from Kinaxis. And the moderator of our event today is Dr. Bill Rand, our very own. He's a professor of marketing at Poole College of Management. He's also the executive director of our business analytics initiative, which is our big umbrella sort of under which all of our analytics programs operate. So he's going to be moderating the event. And without much further ado, I'm going to hand over the baton to Bill and take it from here. Thank you all for joining.
Yeah, hello everyone, and thank you again for joining this event that we're putting on together. We've had this event in progress for months now, but due to a couple of delays, but I think this will be very exciting as we go through the materials that we're going to talk about. I want to briefly introduce both of our panelists. I am Bill Rand. I'm the executive director for the Business Analytics Initiative. I also am a professor of marketing analytics here in the Poole College. In fact, I teach the digital marketing class. So if any of you wind up taking the digital marketing class, you'll be in my program there. And if you're in the Masters of Marketing Analytics, I think there's a high likelihood you'll be taking that class. So I look forward to seeing you in that class. But before I get into too much about the individual panelists we have here, I want to briefly mention both Polly and Stefanie represent Kinaxis, which is a very interesting company. Kinaxis enables and supercharges other companies' supply chains and helps to enhance the resilience of those supply chains across the globe. One of the things that I'm really excited about Kinaxis is that they're at the forefront of using artificial intelligence and human intelligence to help those companies prepare for any future, monitor risks, opportunities, and respond to whatever's going on in the world around us. They work in a wide variety of different industries, from consumer products to life sciences to the automotive industry. And they worked with companies such as Ford, Subaru, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, and Lenovo over the years. And so I think it's a fascinating company. So I'm really interested to hear what they have to say about the future of supply chain and how analytics and marketing relate to supply chain. And so without much further ado, let me first introduce Polly Mitchell-Guthrie, who is the Vice President of Industry Outreach and Thought Leadership. Small fun note is that Polly is actually originally from Raleigh, so she knows the area and the Triangle pretty well. Polly, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit? And specifically, I'd love to hear, why are you passionate about supply chain analytics such that you are devoting all your thought leadership efforts in this space?
Sure. Thank you, Bill. And I'm delighted to be here. I like to say I'm Polly from Raleigh. I did grow up there. And so I come by it naturally. I grew up going to NC State games. I will say I went down the road to that little school in Chapel Hill for a couple of degrees, but please don't hold that against me. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But what I'm excited about supply chain and analytics and marketing at the intersection, because they really represent threads coming together in my career. So I spent many years working at SAS Institute, so I came by an interest in analytics naturally. SAS is really one of the world leaders in the space of marketing analytics, so that's really where I first cut my teeth applying my MBA to thinking about marketing analytics and how SAS has spent many years trying to do that. And then got into supply chain, and I worked closely with the marketing team, but never have worked in marketing. So I had to bring in the big guns. I had to bring in Stefanie to have a real marketing person here with me. So we're partners in crime today. But trying to think about how then do we go from marketing analytics to supply chain, and what's the relationship? And that's certainly what we're going to talk about today. But I work in supply chain because Kinaxis is a great company. I was recruited to work here, but given my background in analytics and thought leadership, and I'm delighted to have the conversation.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Polly. And our other panelist today is Stefanie Gordish. So Stefanie is the Senior Vice President of Corporate Marketing. She's only been at Kinaxis for a year, but she's doing fantastic efforts there. So Stefanie, would you introduce yourself a little bit? And, one thing that I think is really interesting is how do you take a concept like supply chain, which is not something that the average person thinks about on a regular basis, and use it as the basis for a huge marketing effort?
Yes, such a good question. Thank you guys for having me, Bill. So great to sit here with you today. And I know we can't see your faces, but I hear there's something like 50 of you joining us. So happy to have you here. I'm Stefanie. I often get the question, what is corporate marketing as a function? So when I think about what the work that we have to do, we're the team that's focusing on helping build the brand for Kinaxis. We'll talk a little bit about that today, building our thought leadership and the story around Kinaxis. So think of content, social media, corp comm, and PR. We're also the team that focuses on delivering these killer customer experiences. So the events that we go to, the events we host for all of our customers, the customer advocacy that we build. So we are going around the company and around all of our customer base, trying to turn them into advocates so that they're out there talking on our behalves, because it's always better to hear from a customer than it is from a vendor or a business. So that's what I think of when I think of corporate marketing, is doing all of the work to help build the story, build the brand, and help make the company meaningful in the world. And I think that hits maybe directly where you are coming from in terms of why, how do you tell the story, or how do you market a thing like supply chain? And I would say, my background, what's interesting for me coming into this role, I've been a decade or so in B2B marketing. And prior, the first decade, I spent in PR and communications. So if anybody's familiar with that, that's really storytelling, and how do you get a story in the Wall Street Journal or the FT or the Economist? And that's all about trend and newsworthiness and bringing, what does a reporter want to hear with what does the audience want to hear? So I focus on storytelling primarily. And I don't think, we've got a lot of analytics folks, right, Polly, on the call, data-minded folks, and there is 100%, importance for data. But I think the piece marketers often miss is the emotional connection and the story. And everything that we buy as consumers, we likely buy because it has some sort of meaning to us. So it's really important to have both of those. So when I think about, taking this job and the work to do at Kinaxis, I think back to the conversation I had with our CEO in my first interview, where he said that supply chains are as old as time. They are the first to, be around when we started. And it started with hunters and gatherers that were exchanging at the time. And it was for necessities. It was for food, shelter, water. And that's how supply chain started. And it's continued in that way. And it's become now niceties. I mean, we all use Amazon, and Amazon is what we get to get all of our niceties and our expectations. So I'd also say today, supply chain is the biggest user of the Earth's natural resources. So the work that we're doing as a company to help power supply chains around the world is meaningful and impactful. And that's the kind of storytelling I want to do for the brand, and get it out there in a way that connects to something we as people, we as our buyers really relate to.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Stefanie. In fact, Polly, I'd like to follow up on that and kind of ask you a follow-up question. So Stefanie did a good job of setting the groundwork of what the historical supply chain is and things like that. But what does a modern supply chain kind of look like, and how do analytics really help us to optimize and improve that supply chain? And can you tell how Kinaxis helps some of the companies who have been trying to improve their supply chains over the years?
Sure. So the simplest definition I think of about a supply chain is that our job is to figure out how to get the right stuff to the right place at the right time. And that sounds super simple, but it's incredibly complicated for so many reasons. So you have to figure out, what are we going to make? How are we going to get it to our customers? And then how do we get it there on time and in full? Meaning, because people don't want something like late. or damaged, and so there's lots and lots of elements of that. And then you have to do that at an efficient manner. And so you have to figure out, I was on a call earlier today where we were talking about what are the most important metrics to measure in a supply chain. How do you measure ultimately the supply chain's ability to contribute to the bottom line? And I want you to think about a company like Apple. So when you think about Apple, you probably think your iPhone, or maybe you're on a Mac. I'm on a Mac right now. And you think of it as a design company, right? And it is a design company, but I want you to think about how important the supply chain is to that design experience. First of all, Tim Cook, the CEO, grew up in supply chain, not as commonly known fact about Apple. But when you get that phone, you have to think about how do you make it so that you can make sure you get the supplies you need. How do you make it so that when it arrives, I get a lot of my Apple stuff via the mail. And so you have that unboxing experience that is good. That's why people make videos these days on unboxing, because it's actually supply chain. How do I actually get it all the way to me? I unbox it and I'm using it and having value and having fun. How do I make sure that it gets to me on time and that I'm communicated with along the way about it getting to me? How do we make sure that I don't have to wait forever because we've made enough? I ordered an iPad during the pandemic, and most of us probably had that experience, and it was late, of course. It took forever because there was a demand far exceeded supply, and we can talk more about that. But those are just some of the elements of where I want you to think about what supply chains do. What we do is we help companies, especially in the orchestration phase. So thinking about how do we plan for all those steps that need to happen? How many do we make? What materials do we need? Where do we have inventory and distribution centers? How do we make sure we have the right packaging we need in the right places at the right time? All those are planning questions. And then execution. So execution is a matter of thinking about something like, right now you may have heard about the problems with the rebels attacks in the Red Sea. And so that has a disruptive effect on a supply chain and literally on the execution. Maybe you've got finished goods on that boat trying to get to customers. How do you intervene? Not just that something has happened. In the analytics space, we often can think about analytics giving us insights, but we don't want to just admire problems. Say, oh, look at that. Our stuff is stuck on that boat. It can't get through the Red Sea. Oh gosh, isn't that terrible? Oh, we just got another update. There's an IoT device on a container telling us, oops, that stuff is still stuck on the boat. That doesn't do a lot for you. You actually need to be able to figure out what to do about the fact that the stuff is stuck on the boat, and how is that going to impact your supply chain end to end, and then what decisions do you make to take action in the execution phase to make it happen. So that's a little bit about what we do at Kinaxis, and we use AI throughout, and I'm quite passionate about that. I could spend a whole hour talking about AI, but I'll leave that for now.
Yeah, for sure. And I am too as well, and I'm sure we can have a discussion about that. But right now, I'm kind of curious from Stefanie's perspective as to how she takes that kind of convoluted nature of the complex world, including attacks within the Red Sea or whatever, and use that to represent how Kinaxis can help a company and organization. So what is the way that Kinaxis is represented in the international market, and how do you use corporate marketing to kind of push that representation along?
Yes, and I love complexity. I love, how do you make complex simple, which is exactly what Polly is talking about. I mean, there's so much going on behind the scenes with supply chain. And interestingly, I've been at the company, you mentioned, I've been at the company about 10 months. I wasn't familiar with Kinaxis before joining. And part of my job is to make sure all of the right people around the world are familiar with Kinaxis and what we do. And I would say, after being here 10 months, what I would tell you is we are a very humble, hardworking. We take on the biggest challenges in the world around supply chain and solve them in a way that isn't, raising our hands saying, oh, look at us, we solved them. It's a Canadian-based company. I'm from the Midwest, so the idea, the roots of Canadian culture really resonated with me. And I would say, internationally, what should you think of as you hear Polly talk about the impact and the work that we're doing? I think we're about trust, we're about reliability, and we're about solving the really difficult problems around the world. Powering the world's supply chains is what we are all about. And, we're working on a new tagline that will help us get some of that credit for the work that we're doing around the world with many of our customers, which we'll chat with you about today. I would say and for each of our customers, what we want to be is about trust and reliability. We want to be at the pipeline behind the operations, behind your supply chain that you believe and feel trust in. Our customers in different regions might say something, a little differently that resonates with each of them. And North America, I've heard it's very much about resilience and agility that we hear a lot from our customers. In Asia Pacific, speed is really important. And in our European colleagues, a lot of visibility as well. Safety, visibility, sustainability. Without visibility, how do you improve on the sustainability front? So behind all of that is a trustworthy company, and that's what we want all of our customers to know about us, and the fact that they can rely on us no matter how challenging the situation is.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Trying to kind of provide that level of certainty in an uncertain future, right?
Yeah.
I think that's really important.
Exactly.
I'm gonna, for the next few minutes, and this was actually a framework that was suggested to me by Polly and Stephanie, but I think it's such a great idea. I think we should roll with it, which is that, if we're going to tie marketing and we're going to tie analytics and we're going to tie supply chain all together, why not start with the construct of the 4 Ps that are at the basic of all of marketing and talk about how they relate to the different aspects. So, hopefully everyone on the call is familiar with the 4 Ps, but here we're talking about price, place, promotion, and product, right? And let's start, supply chain. One of the things we always think about when we think about supply chain is getting things where they should go, right? And so, one of the things we could easily start with is place, right? So how does supply chain help us with our placement in the marketing world? And let's, I'll turn to Stephanie first, back to Stephanie again, to ask, how does a company use supply chain to help improve its relationship to its customers, right? How does it make sure that the placement that the supply chain gives it makes for happier customers in the end?
Yeah, yes. Polly's already sort of started on this topic. The phrase, what I would use in some of the things she talked about, whether it was delays from the Rebels and the Red Sea or the unboxing and all the things that come along with Apple, is supply chain as a brand differentiator. I truly think that is how you should be thinking about supply chain, how many of our customers think about their supply chain. Think of the experiences we all have. Amazon's a great example of a brand. I mean, we use them today because we know we can rely on them for the most part to get something from A to B, if not within 24 hours of when we want it, which has actually set about expectations with consumers in an entirely different way that has made life even more challenging for some of our customers, right, to compete with that expectation. One of our customers, Unilever, I would mention, they are a brand that is very focused on purpose, and their brand is making sustainable living commonplace. That's how they talk about what their goals are. And certainly supply chain is one of the ways that they do that. So you might have seen in the news not too long ago, in November this past year, they opened up access to their patents around the reformulation of ice cream. So instead of through their cold chain process and their distribution process, instead of keeping it at 18 degrees, I think it was 18 degrees Celsius, they opened up the patents so the entire industry could warm them up a little bit to 12 degrees Celsius, which meant the whole industry at large could be more energy efficient. Now, talk about a brand differentiator and a way to use that to be set as sort of an industry standard around the marketplace. So I think many of our customers think of supply chain in that way, as a differentiator for certainly, their company and their teams, but their brand, in a way that customers want to be associated with and buy from companies like that. And Polly,
I'm
I
going to
don't
build on that if I can. Yeah, I was going to build on that. I was going to say, so there's a similar example from Colgate. So Colgate's another one of our customers, and they decided to do the same thing. They invented a recyclable toothpaste tube, and they figured out how to share the design of that tube so that the whole market could use it. And I want you to, the reason I bring up toothpaste is that I remember in my core marketing class in MBA, one of the first sort of cases that really stuck with me was one all about toothpaste brand placement. And I want you to think about the fact that the supply chain implication of this is that if you're trying to think about, we all know you want your toothpaste right at eye level in the grocery store, right? You don't want it on the bottom shelf where nobody wants to bend down to get it. So you want to be eye level. Well, you have to think about the fact that if your packaging changes to recyclable tube and maybe different box, or maybe no box at all, it changes its ability to put it on the shelf, how many you can put on the shelf, how it impacts what that retailer is going to think about in terms of what they want to put on the shelf. And so if your packaging requirements from your supplier, you're the consumer goods company, but you get your packaging from a supplier, if that's off even by 1 or 2 millimeters, it can make a difference in terms of that ability to get on the shelf. So that's a supply chain question that affects placement, and placement all the way down to literally placement on the shelf, let alone how do you think about the increasing world of what changes things is when you're thinking about omnichannel and direct to consumer versus a retail strategy, and this is happening more and more. What you don't think about behind the scenes is SKUs and pallets and lot sizes. So these are big planning questions that impact direct to consumer. You might not, it's cheaper to ship a big pallet of toothpaste tubes to a distribution center or to a store than it is to ship 1 tube to me. And so again, placement and packaging all starts to, and delivery and distribution all starts to have an impact there on the planet, as Stefanie said, as well as pricing and your product and your placement.
Polly, I know that resonates so well with me. I want to ask you a quick follow-up question along those lines, which there's been a lot of interest recently, and especially during the pandemic, of direct consumer goods, right? And, for instance, one of the brands that I was actually just talking about this morning with one of our colleagues, Michael Stenko, who also teaches in this program, right, was a company called Magic Spoon, right? And Magic Spoon makes these like protein enriched cereals, right? And they were direct to consumer during the pandemic. That's when they started, right? And then in fact, it may have started just before the pandemic and were direct to consumer then and kind of wound it down. But how, as from Kinaxis' perspective, or for any kind of supply chain company's perspective, how do you go about, or what's the first step in going about that switch to go from direct to consumer to now you can buy Magic Spoon at like the local Harris Teeter or whatever the grocery store is near you, right? It seems like that's a lot to think about and a lot to change, right? And so how do you stay flexible in that space of being able to handle both selling the toothpaste directly to one person, but also sending out a big box of toothpaste to a grocery store as well?
That's a great point, and I'll shift for just 1 second and give an example of diapers. So we have a number of companies that make diapers, and diapers are, to my knowledge, are not typically directly sold direct to consumer. But the point I want to make is that you're thinking about part of the reason companies like direct to consumer is the ability to connect directly to the customer, because they want to be able to have that close relationship. And what diaper companies are thinking about is they will sell infant diapers at a loss, essentially, because they know if you start using, and I'm not going to name a brand name so I don't alienate any customer, but if you start using one brand when your baby is first born, literally what they come home from the hospital in, you're more likely to stick with that brand. So they have a lot invested in that relationship. So same thing, like whatever we can do with direct to consumer to build that relationship. We've seen like some of the beverage companies going with these ways that you can have your own brand, your special packaging made. Again, that allows you to build that relationship with the consumer, allows you to get data. Think about marketing analytics. You can get more data on actual end buyers, which can give you a richer source of information to make the decisions. But from a supply chain perspective, it complicates things. So when you think about, I'm going to just use round numbers here for a second. If you think your demand is going to be for 19 widgets, but your widgets come in pallets and lot sizes of 50, well, you can't just order 19, you have to order 50. And so, or do you go up and down to 25, let's say the lot sizes come in 25 or 20, 15, something like that. So you have to think about the supply chain implication, and that goes all the way to the direct consumer model, in that, again, you have to think about the flexibility and consumer patterns change. So what we know from the pandemic is that companies, direct to consumer obviously went up hugely during the pandemic, but it has gone down in some areas, and it hasn't played out exactly like everybody thought. Everybody thought that there'd be a much longer persisting stick of everybody wanting everything shipped to their house, and that has not proven to be the case. I don't have the data in front of me, but I know that it has been surprising from us. So you're right, Bill, to say that you have to build a flexible supply chain, and you have to think about those costs. And maybe that's I'm giving you a
well, that's
I'm
actually
giving
a
you a
great
plug
lead
here,
into
Bill.
the next question. So let's move on from placement to price, right? And like historically, when we teach price in business schools, right, a lot of times we talk about like supply of labor and supply of materials and these kinds of things, but we don't talk as much about supply chain, right? I mean, it's there, but it's not as prominent a topic as you might think it should be, right? And so how can a firm use its supply chain to help, decrease its price points, make sure it's advantageous to the customers? And, how does analytics on that supply chain help? And I think you we're already starting to give us an example there. So just if you want to continue with that, that'd be fantastic. But yeah, exactly.
So supply chains are historically seen as a cost center, and the challenge of that is that the supply chains are historically saddled with this idea of get the right stuff to the right place at the right time for the lowest cost. And that's not easy to do. And it's an oversimplification, because I'll give you an example I was thinking about recently related to execution. So let's go back to our boat stuck maybe somewhere out in the sea, trying to figure out should it wait outside the Red Sea to go through and see if things clear up, or what is it going to do? So it's waiting out there in the Red Sea on the boat, and you look at the stuff that's on the boat, and maybe you have multiple things on that boat, and some of the things on that boat are maybe it's high volume but low margin products. You're willing just to let them wait and sit there because low margin, you don't want to expedite. But maybe you have a high margin, highly valuable customer, something on there you're going to pluck off the boat and expedite and put it on a plane to ship it to the customer. So you need to have that transparency into your supply chain, so you can understand, where do I want to make that expedite decision? Where do I not want to waste money? Because any cost you incur that is in excess of what you thought about, you're going to have to think about, do I pass it on to the consumer or the customer if you're a B2B business, or do I so one of the reasons, for example, wanting to have more environmentally friendly practices is that we have a challenge. It's a little like the prisoner's dilemma, if you've had that in your education somewhere along the way. If you're the first mover, you don't necessarily face an advantage. You may incur a higher cost to have more sustainable packaging that costs you more to make. You can get the whole market to adopt it. There will be more suppliers of those materials that will drive the costs down, so you're not paying a first mover excess advantage that you think, for example, maybe you can't pass on to your customers. So you have to weigh. Supply chain is really a business of trade-offs. And so it's that trade-off of, okay, if I make this supply chain decision, it increases the price, but maybe it increases customer satisfaction. And will customers be more willing to pay for that if they have higher satisfaction, versus the sustainability impacts if I do this? So it's all these trade-offs, and trying to figure out, how do I have the greatest agility and the ability to model those trade-offs and actually see the implications across your supply chain.
Yeah,
I would just add to that. And when we think about it from a B2B perspective too, right, Polly, it's all about value. And you're already hitting on that with the consumer value. Even as a B2B company, we're thinking about that from a price perspective, in terms of what value are you delivering to the end user, the customer in this case. And if part of it, your customers value natural ingredients that are used in whatever, I was thinking hair care products, if it is sustainable packaging, like those are the things you need to think about when you're thinking price, and you're thinking, what value is that? Again, do I pass it through to the consumer? Is part of my brand differentiator and my price speed in Amazon's case, those sort of things. So it really is about value and trade-off that you're asking yourself where supply chain comes in.
And if we get back to marketing analytics for a second, the one of the things I'm sure you've all experienced with Amazon is when they give you those nudges, I'll call it a nudge, that says that if you're willing to take this delivery not tomorrow but Friday, we'll give you this credit. And sometimes they're more transparent with that than not. But again, think of it, it's going to cost them more if they have to get it to you tomorrow. What are they willing to give you in exchange if you're willing to wait? and how do they market that idea? So there's a marketing angle there to this. There's also a trade-off decision. How do they make that decision on the fly? Because they can't look, oh, look, hey, everybody, let's have a group meeting. Stephanie just ordered something. Let's have a meeting to decide what to do about Stephanie's order. No, we have to make those decisions right there immediately. So you have to have a platform that can do that analysis, make the analytical decision, and deliver the nudge to Stephanie right there. And then later, ex post facto, look at what decisions we made and figure out how do we use that data and the insights from it to tweak the way we change things, and then how does that potentially tweak the way we make our supply chain. So what some companies are doing, for example, is they use analysis to decide, you know what, it used to take us this many parts to make our product. We're going to try to use our product design to reduce it to this many parts or raw materials so that it's easier to make. We're less reliant on multiple suppliers. And it makes us more resilient and more reliable and easier to manufacture, et cetera. Again, they have marketing implications, but those are supply chain decisions.
Yeah, and you are also seeing that on the, I don't know what you call it, the reverse supply chain, on the return side of things as well.
Yes,
right now,
yes.
right? Which is, you see all these companies suggesting that, hey, if you bring it back to the store rather than dropping it in a box or whatever, right, then we'll give you, maybe we'll refund it to your credit card right away, as opposed to giving you a store credit for it, right, or something like that. Because obviously, if you bring it to the store, it reduces their supply chain costs on the back end too, as well, right? So yeah.
Yes and no. A thing that is not widely known is that whole returns business is it is pennies on the dollar for what they get back. And a frightening amount of it. In fact, it's probably a statistic I have repressed out of depression. A frightening amount of it ends up in the landfill. And so companies have a big incentive to try to think about, again, those trade-offs of how do I satisfy the customer by letting them have anything they want anytime and return it, no questions asked, which is a lot of the trend these days, with knowing the fact that those returns, if they get it back, their ability to use it is, again, pennies on the dollar. And there's a whole aftermarket in that, fascinating story on its own. And there are sustainability implications, cost implications, brand implications. Burberry got into big trouble years ago because you may not care if some commodity product gets thrown in the landfill, but they did not want Burberry branded products, at goodwill. And so they burned them. They literally, I'm talking fire, like conflagration. They burned them and they got terrible attention for the fact that, oh my gosh, there are people that don't have enough goods in this world to start out with, and you're burning your luxury brand. So it can really come back to haunt you. And that's a supply chain implication because it's your stuff. You have to get the stuff back at the end.
Yeah, for some reason, the thought of it just jumped into my mind. I don't know if you know this story, but the video game E.T., the video game based around the movie, was widely panned as the worst video game ever made, almost killed the video game industry. And it turns out they buried 50,000 cartridges in a desert somewhere, right? And so again, but that got found out, and people are like, "Why are you burying this stuff?" Right? Like, it's like, it's definitely a negative implication towards the brand, right, in many respects.
Absolutely.
So these are all kind of obviously brand implications, right? And a big point of doing things correctly in this space is so that you can make a brand connection to your consumers, so that you can promote the products that you have to your consumers in a way that they then decide to go out and buy them. Stephanie, normally when we think of promotion, we think of traditional advertising, we think of billboards, we think of digital ads, right? We think of all these kinds of things. We don't necessarily think of the relationship of supply chain to product promotion, right? But how does supply chain play a role in product promotion and in advertising? And can knowledge of your own supply chain help improve, as an organization, your advertising capabilities?
And Polly, jump in here too. I think this is such a great question. As marketers, we think about, you guys have probably heard this in some of your marketing classes, we think about ROMI, return on marketing investment, when we're thinking about what do we invest in? How much is it going to cost us to sell a product? How much is it going to cost us to acquire a new customer? So we think a lot in those terms when we are thinking about promotion strategy. I'll come back to, because Polly, I think you gave a great example on Apple and the unboxing and how do they think about that, because that's part of their experience. But one brand that comes to mind, I won't name them out loud, but that comes to mind, they are an athleisure company based in Canada as well. And I read something not long ago, a little while ago, on impacts from them. They have their merchandise bags, a ton of brand equity in these merchandise bags. They're red bags, if that helps anyone think of who I might be talking about here. That they were making all of those bags in one factory in Southeast Asia. And the impact that that could have, that decision, once that was discovered, that all of that equity was sitting in that one factory in Southeast Asia. If a fire happened, if a tsunami happened, if anything happened, what would be the impact of that decision? So I think that's one big way where, you know, you're thinking about promotion strategy, and man, they had so much behind that and the impact those decisions can have. I'd also go back to Polly, your Apple example, right, of the unboxing, and that's part of the experience. It's why we all wait in line the way we do at Apple. So every decision that they make, whether it's sustainability, cost, back to that ROMI metric, is what goes into, and the critical role that the supply chain plays in those decisions, for sure. And Polly, I'm sure you have a lot else you'd add to this too.
Yeah, I was thinking about the role of promotions here. So there's a very important phenomenon in supply chain called the bullwhip effect. And it was coined by a professor at Stanford named Hal Lee, and it actually has a marketing angle on it, because what happened is that Volvo was making green cars. Their green cars were not selling very well. And one of the things that's complicated as a marketer in the automotive business is Volvo is what's called an OEM, an original equipment manufacturer. They don't actually sell direct to consumers. They have the dealership model, like most of the OEMs do. Tesla's an exception. They actually don't have the end customer data. So the dealerships were sitting on all these green cars that wouldn't sell. They did a heck of a promotion to sell the green cars. Suddenly there was an increase in buying of green cars. And suddenly somebody back in Sweden got the idea that, oh, I guess there's a big demand for green cars. We better make more green cars. And suddenly they were sitting on a problem, because that was the whole problem they had in the first place. So you want to have good data, good analytics, good visibility. And one of the things that automotive companies have had to figure out how to do is how do they think about when we make a car, how many do we make that are green? How many do we make? How many do we make that are green? How many do we make that are sunroofs? How many do we make with fancy radios or fancy brakes? And again, from a supply chain and because we don't know how many they're going to buy, you're going to just go. Most of us go on the lot and you buy what's available. You wanted a green car with a sunroof, but they didn't have any with sunroofs, so you buy a blue car with a sunroof, or a red car. You didn't want red, but you wanted the sunroof, so you buy that. Well, they have to figure out how to plan for all of this, and that has supply implications because of what parts and materials you need, and then how do you market that. So again, supply chain has big implications here in terms of promotions is at the root there, that they had to promote the heck out of it, and then they ended up sending the wrong signal to the market.
Yeah,
or to the company rather.
That's interesting. And in that case, you're talking about like literally green cars, like the color.
Literally green car.
But I think we're seeing some of that similar play out with the EV cars nowadays, right? That several of the automobile companies are having trouble figuring out how many new battery factories do we need to build versus how many, what's the demand? And, different companies are doing completely different things in this space, right? So, we see the Korean companies, Kia and Hyundai, like ramping up production like crazy, while at the same time, some of the domestic players are turning stuff down, right? And not producing as many as they originally saw. So that's fascinating, because obviously that affects what lineup they're going to be pushing more in the near future, right? If they have a bunch of EVs sitting around, right, then they're going to want to be promoting those more often, right, than they will if they're not. So yeah, fantastic example for sure. Well, let's turn to the last piece, but before I do want to mention to everyone that we're going to open up for question and answer in a little bit. And if you notice, there should be a Q&A button on the bottom of your Zoom screen right now. So you should be able to type any question that you have for our panelists into that. And I'll be moderating and looking through those questions as they pop up. So please do type in a few questions. We'll open up in a little bit here for questions from the audience. But before we get to that, we definitely have to touch on the last P of all, of course, which is products, right? So Polly, I'll start with you. What role does supply chain and supply chain analytics, and I think we were just hinting at it with respect to green cars, but let's say I'm not interested in a new green car, I'm interested in a brand new product, right? How can I use knowledge about my supply chain and analysis of my supply chain to help me think about what kinds of new products I want to develop or what kinds of products I want to put out there?
So one example I'll give is from thinking about sustainability. One of the things that a lot of the consumer goods companies have realized is that a lot of cleaning products have all this liquid in them. And so when you're shipping liquid, you're basically, when you're shipping water, you're shipping weight, excess weight. And you're thinking about every shelf space, packaging, more packaging to make bigger or something. So they're looking at, how do I take cleaning products and I don't know what the right word is here, make it just sort of dehydrated in a sense. I'm sure that's not the word they would use, but essentially make it more concentrated, far more concentrated, to distill it down to its elements with less packaging. So thinking about, again, what's that customer experience of what I want, working backwards from what does the customer want and how do I satisfy them? Part of what they want is good quality product. They want a product at a reasonable price, and supply chain has an impact on that. Do I want to be, one of the things that some companies are thinking about now is I want to be closer to my customer. And so that might entail, whether you call it friendshoring, nearshoring, back to Stefanie's example, you don't want to be reliant on one supplier of one thing in Southeast Asia, but maybe you want to try to have, just making this up here, maybe a company might decide, all right, I want 3 suppliers, but I want them closer to my customers. So I want one supplier in Asia, one supplier in Europe, one supplier in North America, so that if there's a disruption, not only do I have redundancy in my supply chain, but I also am closer to the customer. Because again, that customer experience, if you're looking at all these supply chain trade-offs, maybe you go with a supplier that costs you a little bit more, but you have greater reliability and trust that you'll be able to get the product on time to that customer because it's closer to them and less disruption. So that's just another way to think about. There's a lot of implications. And again, I said supply chain is all about a trade-off game. Like, what's that trade-off between cost, on-time delivery, maybe you have one supplier. One of the things that Mars did, for example, and Mars is another one of our customers, they looked at their own suppliers. Palm oil. We love to eat M&Ms. I grew up at SAS M&M land, where many of you may know that SAS famously has M&Ms in all the break rooms. Well, palm oil is heavily in most of the products that Mars makes, the candy confectionery products that they make. They had 1,500 suppliers. They decided to shift from 1,500 to, I think, 100 suppliers, so that they could figure out how to reduce deforestation of the rainforest of palm oil, which is heavily grown in Southeast Asia. They figured if they had fewer suppliers, they could monitor them more closely and build relationships with them. And so building those long-term relationships so that they could invest in them, because many of these small suppliers are mom and pop, small farms or mom and pop locations that doesn't go deep in your supply chain before that happens. And what we saw during the pandemic is a number of these smaller suppliers just failed because they didn't have the cash flow to be able to sustain a disruption. So again, looking at those trade-offs, okay, in this case, I value sustainability. I'm going to reduce to fewer suppliers. That may have implications on product quality, cost. I know there's a cocoa shortage right now, so all of it.
Yeah. Awesome. Stefanie, is there anything you want to add on to that?
I'm not necessarily what's just coming to mind for me hearing, Polly, you, and just kind of closing this. What I find so fascinating about this, I'm sure we've made a good point. You guys get the point here on just how much is tied to supply chain and the complexity of everything happening behind anything you get, anything you go buy. What is so fascinating to me and what's going on, many of those who are not customers today, they're doing all of this in their own individual spreadsheet. They're making all of these decisions in a Microsoft, Excel spreadsheet. And if you imagine all of these different departments, Polly, you were just talking about sustainability. Sustainability team sits somewhere else, right? They don't sit necessarily right next to the planner, the person who's managing scheduling, et cetera. So you think about all those different spreadsheets and how all of this has to happen, and then add to it all of the disruptions we now see in the world today. So that is the fascinating thing to me, and the fascinating and impact, when I say the impact that Kinaxis is having, because I think what we bring really differently is we connect all of those spreadsheets into one pane of glass behind technology. So now all of those impacts, everything you're seeing, that's the reason we say those implications now. Our customers like Unilever can make the smart decisions that they do and do it agilely and responsibly, is because they can now see that view much differently than they could before. So it's just a fascinating thing, I think, behind how all of this works.
Yeah, and I'm just going to add one thing on that, Bill, with just a little bit of a story to illustrate. So depending on where you are in your career, you may or may not be familiar with the fact that what Stefanie just said sounds like it's so obvious. Well, of course, you wouldn't run your supply chain on a spreadsheet. You would be shocked and dismayed at how many big companies are running their supply chains on spreadsheets or paper binders. So we have one company that I will not name because the customer told me this embarrassedly, but they have a production schedule, like what are we going to make when? They come up with it based on all these kind of trade-offs I was saying, and then the plant manager prints it out, changes the order, puts it in a 3-ring notebook, and that's what they use. Or I have another friend who told me that he was yelled at in 3 different languages one night because he sent the wrong spreadsheet to the factory in China when it was supposed to be starting up production for a product launch, and they did the wrong version, and it had errors in it. They didn't know what to do. They were trying to get a hold of him, so he got yelled at in 3 languages because of versioning errors. And again, you can't run supply chains on a spreadsheet.
And I think that's a great point to kind of wrap up on, and it actually leads into a last question that I want to ask. And again, I remind the audience, if you have any Q&A, kind of pop them into the Q&A folder we have up there. But a lot of what we're trying to do with the various programs of the students here at NC State in this space is to educate them about how to do those decisions in a more data-driven manner, right? To really kind of bring together the infrastructure of sophisticated IS technology, information systems technologies, right? Like databases and data lakes and all this kind of stuff, and tie them to actual business decisions on the other end, right? So it's not about, emailing the wrong spreadsheet, right? It's about trying to make sure that we have the right connections to make the right data decisions in those plants overseas, right? For instance, right? But
so Procter & Gamble, just one last example.
Yeah,
Procter & Gamble, it used to, the impact, what happens when you don't have these connected systems is that you can't make decisions quickly. So Procter & Gamble, if a retailer came to them and said, you know what, we'd love to do a big promotion on one of your products. Do you have enough product for us to be able to do that? It used to take them literally days to be able to figure out if they had enough product to respond to that incremental promotion request.
Oh, wow.
And taking days means that you run the risk that they go to another consumer goods company, that retail customer of yours, who can respond faster. Now they can answer in minutes, because the decision of whether or not we have enough product, you have to look across your distribution centers. Where do you have inventory? What orders have you promised already? It's a complex decision, and if it's in different silos, what is the schedule of the factory? You can't wait 3 days for somebody in the factory to get back to you. You need to have that right away. And so when you have concurrent end-to-end planning, everybody sees the same information at the same time, that single glass pane, like Stefanie said. And so somebody can answer that incremental promotion request for P&G in minutes, and that means they get the order.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
And our customers, when I think about from a marketing perspective too, being a marketer at Kinaxis, our customers don't always know that, right, Polly? Like you said, they are still using spreadsheets today, and they don't necessarily know that it's wrong. So we're listening, we're looking for data. We're listening for things that they are saying to us. We want to be more efficient. We're not moving fast enough. We don't have visibility. I can't see what my colleague down the hall is doing. We're looking for those call outs to be able to introduce and have a conversation with them about end-to-end visibility. So it's using that data. It's really listening for what our customers are saying. Apple does this well, right? You didn't know you needed an iPhone, but boy, we bought an iPhone. So
right.
I think that's the way data plays into. It's a listening mechanism that we all use to help us stay ahead of what our customers want and be there even before they are.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think that those kind of insights, it's exactly what we're kind of moving towards. And it's kind of amazing to me to think that, we are moving in a world where if you don't have those analytics skills, if you don't have those analytics capabilities built into your organization, you're a step behind, or, maybe 5 or 10 or 100 or 1,000 steps behind, right? At some point, right? So that actually kind of brings me to the kind of last question I wanted to ask you both, which is, given the fact that we have an audience of students who are studying marketing analytics, business analytics, risk and analytics, what advice would you give to those students, some of whom are, professionals who are still working in the field, but now doing this program as part of their additional education? If they're interested in a career in supply chain and in looking at supply chain analytics, what advice would you give them? What should they be studying? What should they be looking at? What should they be doing in order to prepare for a career along the lines of what we've talked about today?
Polly.
So I'd say, first of all, I'd say give supply chain a serious consideration, even if you don't think you want to make a career out of supply chain. All the examples we've just given you, I think, hopefully illustrate the key role supply chain plays in marketing. And so if you do a stint in supply chain, you'll learn a lot that you can carry forward throughout your career. Like I said, think back to Mary Barra, at the CEO of GM, started her, made her career through supply chain. So it's a great path to the C-suite, because one of the things that we learned during the pandemic is how important supply chain is to delivering on your brand promise. And if you have a career that shows that you know how to use the supply chain as a tool to execute results for your company, that is a path to the C-suite. The second thing I'd say is, this is just a general piece of advice. When you're looking at roles, if you're looking at a new opportunity, there's what the job is supposed to do and what you think, how you think it will position you or not on your career path. I would encourage you to think about who you'll be working for and with, and who you can learn the most from, because I can almost guarantee the most fruitful career decision will be the one where you pick, maybe it's the job that feels like it's a little less interesting to you on paper, but you feel like the team you can learn the most from. Wherever you can learn, go there. That's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck in your career.
Great. What I would add to that too, then, Polly and Bill, is one, I smiled when you asked why supply chain, because I again think back to something Polly, our CEO, says all the time, where he's been in the industry for decades, and he says, many years ago, I would go to any party and have a conversation with anyone about multi-echelon inventory optimization, and people walked away. They gave me the Heisman and said, yeah, no, thank you. But today you can have a conversation with somebody about supply chain, and they're super interested. COVID has changed that for us. Everything that's happening has made it real to all of us. So it is really, I think, just at the beginning of the importance that it will have in our world going forward, all the things that we're facing and will continue to face. So give it a shot. It's super interesting and super fun. My general piece of advice, Polly, much like you, is from personal experience, just try things. Try all sorts of different things. I don't think either of us, any of us here, right, Bill, anyone on this call would say you had your career lined up linearly, is that the right word? With what you plan to do. Every step you take is learning and information as to where you go next. So try it. Give this a try, give everything a try, because it is how your career will become, the richness it can have.
Yeah, I jokingly tell my students every single year that I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So I very much believe in that principle for sure. We actually have a couple minutes left, so I just in the interest, and because we already kind of jokingly mentioned it a couple of times, how about AI? What's the role of AI with
I was waiting for that,
chain,
Polly.
and how is that going to change the future of supply chain in this space?
Well, it's going to it is already making a huge impact. And I'll tell you why, because when you think about something as supposedly as simple as understanding demand, that's any company, particularly the closer you are to consumer, the more you want to have an understanding of demand. If you make big airplanes like Boeing, you don't make so many, but that you can plan for demand, you're actually probably taking orders. You're driven by your orders. But on the demand side, you have to figure out how many things people are going to buy. Historically, we have made demand planning, forecasting decisions based on sales data, sales history. The problem with that is that is only looking in the rearview mirror. That's only giving us what was done in the past, which may not be an indicator of the future. We might want to bring in other signals. And so if we are a retailer, we might want to look at, okay, what events are happening? What are the holidays? What are the events that are happening near my retail locations that might impact demand for my good at that location based on the events that are happening on a given day, on a given night? And so those are an example of bringing in outside signals, not just what did we sell in the past. Remember, we sold a lot of green cars because we had to promote the heck out of the green cars nobody wanted to buy. So if we actually want to go be market-driven, not marketing-driven, but market-driven, we have to look at external signals beyond the history, and the AI can help us do that. So we can use machine learning to bring in external signals, it's called demand sensing, that can increase the accuracy and the granularity of a demand forecast. That's just one example, Bill, but I think that there's, the three pillars of AI are data, data, and data. We have a lot of data in supply chain, so getting more data, getting richness out of your data, that's all about a marketing analytics and a supply chain analytics intersection there, trying to figure out what can we learn from that data? How can it help us make better decisions? What outside data signals might we want to bring in to enrich our signal and understanding? That is a tremendous promise. And then generative AI. I can't not talk about generative AI, which has incredible potential to allow us as humans to connect with whatever in our own natural language. Instead of having to search through a whole bunch of help documents, how can I say, I don't know how to create this new worksheet in my supply chain planning tool. Let me just go ask it, and it will go search at all the help documents and give me an answer. And maybe I'm in Mexico and I'm a planner at a plant in Mexico, and it allows me to ask in Spanish. It can go look at all the documents in English and give me one answer in Spanish for me, Paulina, of what I was looking for. So that's a tremendous productivity.
And all of our customers are asking about it, right, Polly? We can't get into a conversation and not address where AI is going in supply chain.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I want to thank you both, Polly and Stefanie, for this fascinating discussion. I very much enjoyed it, and I'm sure our audience of attendees did as well. Yeah, this has been absolutely amazing. So thank you so much for your time and your efforts, and for your wisdom that you've shared with us here. I think that this is kind of an area that often doesn't get highlighted enough, which is the connection between these areas of supply chain and marketing and analytics. And I think we did a fantastic job of illuminating it today. So thank you so much for your efforts and your time. Rishika, do you have anything you want to say to wrap us up, or?
Just that, thank you everyone for joining in today, and thank you, Stefanie, thank you, Polly, thanks, Bill, for the, it was a great learning experience. The session was great, so thank you so much for the session and the talk. Yes, I wanted to put in a question, but I guess as a panelist, I was not able to put in a question. And we're out of time, so maybe some other time. But thank you again, and appreciate everybody joining in this evening. Thank you all, and have a great evening.